For the next 2 hours, you will have a story and the quiet to sleep inside it.
Not with outrage, with patient attention. A sentence that wakes only for candlelight.
You will hear how days are shepherded, how continuity can sound like anesthesia. Relics baptized from instruments, questions chained, then enthroned.
No drama, only competence, as it was. A footnote trimmed to fit a flawless page.
A city reassured by likeness. Ceremonies tuned to the smell of a cuff. If you carry one sentence into sleep, let it keep you honest.
For the next 2 hours, keep your own time. Breathe slowly. Let the rooms quiet.
I was ordained to keep quiet, not to remember. For years I carried the quiet like a lantern with its wick turned low, the kind of light you cup with your hand so no wind can see it. I thought silence was a sacrament, only later did I learn it was a method. Silence wasn't sacred, it was enforced. I won't give you my name, not because I fear you will find me, but because I fear you will remember me too clearly and forget what matters. Names are easy to misfile. I saw it done. What matters is the door, iron-veined, inward breathing, like a lung half a flight below the cataloging room, where the air tasted of old coins and wet limestone. They called it the porta manus, the handed gate, as if the stone itself had learned to pass down what it held to whatever hand could bear it next. You don't see it in any tour map, not even the ones that mark the emergency exits. That is the genius of a good secret. It hides behind the plausible and under the ordinary, where eyes become lazy. The first time I turned its key, I was not heroic. I was obedient. The errand, as it was given, was practical. A crate to be moved, a signature to be witnessed. Nothing more glamorous than the circulation of objects in a place that has always measured itself by what it keeps. I signed for a ring of keys I had never seen a set that hummed faintly against the bone of the wrist when you shook it. Inventory, the prefect said, in the way you speak a word that doubles as an absolution. By then, I had learned how to nod without asking the kind of question that makes rooms colder. Down the stairs, the light went from a gold that flatters icons to a colorless smear that makes faces honest. The corridor had been cut wider once, then pinched by later walls, the masonry speaking in eras the way a tree speaks in rings. The floor stones bowed toward a drain that had no grate. Lamps hung at intervals measured not by feet but by patience. Some sputtered, others weren't lit at all, so that my own breathing became useful as sonar sound going out, sound coming back. Distance, measured in the honesty of echo. There is a moment in such a corridor when you feel the shape of what you do not see trying to remember itself around you. If you have never felt that, I cannot teach it to you. If you have, I don't need to. The door had a lip, as if it once drank from a flood. Its hinges didn't screech, they sighed, as if woke from something older than sleep. I fit the key long as a finger, toothed like a saw with one tooth missing, and the metal turned with the slight reluctance of a held breath. Cold air exhaled through a seam, carrying the smell of vellum cured just a little too fast. I told myself the crate would be just inside. I told myself I was still in the business of shelves and ledgers. I told myself many things, because lies are easiest to believe when they are said in the second person, to the self who is always listening and rarely resisting. The room beyond was smaller than the fear I had brought to it. That is another thing you learn. The most consequential geographies begin as disappointments. A table, a stool, a wall that looked like it wanted to be a door and had thought better of it. The lamps were decent, humming faintly, their wicks pinched into blue. The crate sat obedient at the center, stenciled with a code that indicated nothing to anyone, without a copy of the ledger that had taught me how to read it. On top of the crate lay a book like an organ graft, bound in scarlet thread that was less thread than vein. The title was stitched, not written letters raised, audible when you ran a nail along them. Custodia sanguinis, the blood custody. They say in some places the first touch is how an object chooses you. I did not choose the book. My palm hovered. The air around it felt busier than it looked, as if the dust had learned to whisper. When I finally let my skin meet the cover, the lamp nearest me dimmed in sympathy. The scarlet threads were taut but warm, as if they had remembered a hand recently. The table trembled a little. Perhaps it was my hands. I have told myself this many times. I had been trained to catalog bindings, to sniff the glue and guess centuries, to test the flexibility of the spine without violating it. This, however, refused classification. It was not merely forbidden, it was somehow uncooperative, an artifact with its own pulse. I lifted the front board by a degree. Inside, the paper had that faint resilience of vellum's thinner cousin, the page rippling almost imperceptibly, like water steadying itself after a bead of rain. At the top of the first page, no heading, only a red rule. There was a column of dates with no years, as if the book assumed a calendar you had to earn. The second column held places. Some I knew, some I wished I did. The third column held nothing I can transcribe, not because it was illegible, but because writing it would make it become something again, and I am not ready to make it that real. At the edge of the page, a pinprick of brown, not ink, iron. Someone had sealed an entry with blood, perhaps to make their memory feel obligated. That is when I felt the old bite at the base of my thumb itch, the scar from the day I had been inducted into the logistics of custody. Just a drop, the prefect had said then, in a voice that made ceremony sound like a shrug. The pen's nib had been clean. Its reservoir had not. We were told it bound our duty to the page. That day, I believed duty was a kind of freedom, a map in exchange for obedience. The arithmetic felt fair. Now the scar itched like an animal that knows rain before the sky does. I set the book down. The crate, I told myself. The crate. The lid had been secured with a practical twine that remembered how to tangle only where eyes were tired. I cut it with a blade kept in my collar. Ours were not the romantic daggers of a Renaissance painting. Ours were the crisp utility of a modern archive. A blade meant to slice packing tape, not throats. The lid lifted half an inch and resisted. The smell that came out was old straw overlaid with something salt and faintly sweet, the way fruit smells when it has surrendered to the idea of wine. I levered the lid open. Inside, orderly bundles wrapped in cloth, sealed with wafers that bore no crest, only the impression of two lines inside a circle. The sign I would later learn not to say aloud. The wax was gray, like ash, as if the seal wanted to be negative space more than emblem. I unwrapped one bundle, then another. Relics, if we keep to the official nouns, a fragment of bone that neither belonged to a saint I knew nor to a creature I could name without hesitating. A vial with a plug, so tight, the glass shivered if you thought too hard about opening it. A strip of parchment ironed flat by time, its ink silvering at the edges. I do not want to be sensational. It is important that I be precise. The bone had sutures where no human skull has them, and yet it was not monstrous, only uncooperative with my categories. The vial held a clear liquid that did not cling to the glass, but to light when I tilted it. The lamps swam toward it, as if remembering a duty elsewhere. The parchment bore a sketch of a coast with 2 inlets I have never seen on any atlas that survived the room above. In the lower left margin, a notation, a date with 3 digits and a saint's feast I had been taught was established 2 centuries later. I put the strip back and told myself again, inventory. A bell struck somewhere higher up. Not the bell that called to prayer. The one that counted. When you work long enough in an obedient building, you learn its grammar. Prayer bells tell you what to chant. Inventory bells tell you what to forget. 1 strike meant a movement of objects. 2 meant a movement of people. 3 meant attention from the kind of attention that wears a ring. I counted 1, then, softer, as if the sound changed its mind halfway down the stairwell, half of another. It is possible for a bell to hesitate. It is not common. I looked at the book again, and saw that the thread at the gutter tugged slightly, as if the pages below it bore more weight than the ones above. I closed the crate, tied it. I tell you this because disobedience begins best with an act of obedience, the way a clean sheet of paper makes the eventual blot feel consequential. I lifted the book as one lifts a sleeping child, not for fear of waking it, but for fear it might wake itself out of habit. I had a pocket in my cassock that would fit it. I did not use it. I set the book back on the lid of the crate and told myself I had not reached the point where choices were treason. The corridor was colder on the way out, or I had become warmer. The light at the foot of the stair turned the dust into a kind of weather. Up the flight, the cataloging room had resumed its mild impersonation of an office. Ledger spines like fences, little wooden trays of cards whose corners frayed with righteous fatigue, a globe half the size of a modest sin. When I signed the movement complete, the prefect took the ledger and did not look at the line I had made. He looked at my face. "How did the room feel?" he asked. That is not the sort of question one expects after moving boxes. "Smaller than I imagined," I said. "The truth is safe in degrees." He nodded in a way that could be satisfaction or sorrow. "They often are, at first. Remember that." He did not say what I should remember. In hindsight, that was the entire point. Remembering is stronger than instruction when you are trying to make the memory durable. He turned the ledger to the page where I had signed, pressed his ring next to my name. The ring's impression was not the crest I had seen before, but a simple circle, interrupted by 2 lines that did not touch its edge. "There are services," he said, "that do not belong to orders." The sentence went nowhere, and yet arrived. "Return the keys." "What about the book?" I asked, too quickly. If you have ever asked the wrong question at the right volume, you will understand the kind of silence that follows. It is not quiet. It is charged, like a wire that has learned to sing. "What book?" he said at last, and the page beneath his hand seemed to agree with him. I glanced at the key ring. It had lost 1 key, the one with the missing tooth. I told myself I had imagined the threads raised like veins. If you say a thing enough times in a room with enough shelves, the thing begins to go obedient. I returned the keys. The prefect set them down with the care a man gives a hot pan when he is pretending it has cooled. "There will be more crates," he said. The work is the work." He smiled without his eyes. His eyes did other work. Sleep that night came like accounting orderly at first, then dishonest by increments. In the dream, I ran between rooms with the competent fear of a man who has earned keys. Running teaches you routes. Routes make maps. Maps become habits. Habits make obedience look like nature. Somewhere in the dream, a corridor repeated itself: left turn, arch, alcove, left turn, arch, alcove, until the corridor learned the shape of a loop and forgot it had ever been a line. The paintings along the wall changed without moving. Saints I recognized lost their nameplates. Unfamiliar faces inherited their halos. At eye level, a silver plate I had not noticed before offered itself to my reading. The words were tidy, the kind of Latin that believes in itself. Memoria ordo est. Memory is order. I woke with a taste in my mouth like dried blood on paper. My thumb ached at the old prick. I told myself, morning will rinse this away. Morning is the kind of light that makes superstition look like humidity. But morning did not rinse. Morning brightened what it touched, and discovered that some of it could not be brightened without being revealed. The tower's astral clock, our proud brass contrivance, zodiac teeth picking the hours with the courtesy of an old servant, missed a minute at noon, then stole it back from the afternoon, a petty theft I might not have noticed had the sacristan not cursed under his breath in the manner of a man who is used to blessing. "A trifling calibration," he said, puffing at the mechanism. "Humidity." The word has always been the friend of easy explanations. By evening, a ledger entry I had shelved the week before, bread allotments, pairs of sandals issued. A small expense for lamp oil made room for itself between pages, dated 4 years apart. I checked the binding. It had not been rebounded. I checked the numbering. It had not learned new arithmetic. I checked myself. The page smelled of oil, yes, but of new oil on old hands. When I mentioned it, a clerk with the soft voice of a safe man said, "Restoration, nothing to worry about." He wrote a small mark in the margin that meant the page had been noticed. Not seen noticed. Seen implies a future. Noticed implies a closing of the book. The next crate arrived 2 nights later. I did not receive the keys. I did not go down. I was assigned to a room where names are peeled from their skins and made to fit drawers. Saints with histories like river deltas, miracles subtracted from lives so that lives can be filed as miracles. Do not mistake me. I am not mocking devotion. I believe in the sacred because I have seen it abused. A thing must be real to be defiled. The day was busy with cards and the solemn comedy of handwriting. The night, when it came, offered again the corridor with its unembarrassed loop. This time, the silver plate at eye level bore a new inscription, scratched in by a hand that possessed more will than skill. Memoria orbis est. Memory is the world. When I woke, the taste in my mouth had turned from iron to lime, the flavor of stone shivering itself into sand. I began to carry a small notebook in my sleeve, the kind you can lose without being suspected of having wanted it. In it, I wrote what did not agree with the room, clocks that apologized, pages that forgot their neighbors, the way a man's ring left a mark only sometimes, as if the seal itself retained the right to be selective. I wrote down the smell in the stairwell, old coins and wet limestone, and on a day when rain made the city honest, the smell rose in my memory. With such force, I found myself at the top of the half-flight, without meaning to be. The key was not in my possession. That, I told myself, was a mercy. Yet the door remembers hands better than pockets. In its seam a draught equal to a whisper. I stood there, gathering reasons not to be a man who tries a handle when he does not own the key. My hand went where hands go. The handle did not turn. Of course it didn't. But it moved a fraction of a degree toward a permission it had not given. The fraction was enough to let out a breath of air that carried not the odor of vellum, but the dry sweetness of pollen. There are flowers that bloom underground. They are not meant for us. The next day I was summoned, not by bell but by the attention that wears a ring. The prefect's office reproduced the decorum of a truth, even when it did not possess one. A table with the discipline of a rectangle, a shelf of books that turned their faces toward the room as if coached, a window that gave the right amount of light, the way a careful host pours the right amount of wine. The prefect gestured to a chair. People in authority often use gestures where words would force them to commit. "You have been diligent," he said. My name, that convenient handle, came after the praise, a common trick to make the handle feel sturdy. Diligence is how one learns the difference between inventory and history. I thought they were the same, I said, letting naivete do the work that insolence cannot. He smiled. His smile did not tempt his eyes into agreement. Inventory is what we admit exists. History is why. He let the sentence live in the room a moment, to watch who it would approach first. There is a service, he continued, not an order that preserves why. I said nothing. Silence, properly kept, is indistinguishable from permission. The handed gate, he said. And at last his eyes did something interesting. They flicked, not away from me, but toward the part of me that keeps faith with the parts of speech. You have felt it breathe. And I might have denied it. A clean denial would have closed a number of doors I had not yet learned to want. Instead, I let the truth do a portion of the work. I have felt the stairwell draft, I said. Old coins, wet limestone. Good, he said. It remembers details. He slid a ledger toward me that was not of the public sort. Its paper had been made by hands that liked water enough to bless it. The first page held no title. The second page held a set of rules. The third page was blank, waiting for a name. My hand itched. This is not a vow, he said. It is an agreement. That is a vow that refuses to be called one, I said, not aloud. He set a pen across the gutter of the book, the nib clean, the reservoir not. Either I had learned, or he had. Just a drop, he said, replicating the day of induction, reducing a life to a measurable quantity. I did not reach for the pen. He did not press. Diligence has brought you to a threshold. Thresholds reward those who do not rush. He closed the book without letting me see the back matter, and the sound of the covers meeting had the soft certainty of two truths agreeing to share a room. There will be another crate tonight, he said. You will not receive the keys. You will receive a list. A list of what? Things that are not to be counted. I waited for comprehension to arrive through the polite door. It came through the window instead, as comprehension often does. Because counting fixes them to a number, I said, hearing in my own mouth the echo of a warning I had not yet been given. And numbers can be discovered. He nodded, and his nod meant we were now in the part of the room where one must choose how much of what one already knows one is willing to admit to knowing. Inventory teaches obedience, he said. Custody teaches discretion. By Sigh. What of the Dan's prices? When I left his office, the corridor had learned a new trick. The lamps made halos of a modest and convincing size, and there were just enough footsteps behind me to make me believe in accompaniment without being able to prove it. In a niche that had once held a saint and now held a cleaning rag, someone had set a sliver of mirror. It showed my face edited by the angle of the glass. I lifted a hand and saw in the reflection that my fingers had become inked faint letters running backward along the veins, as if the skin had learned to be a palimpsest. I wiped at it. The letters went obedient, not away. Under the letters, the old prick at the base of my thumb burned like a small candle that refuses to be bullied by breath. Night returned with its reliable agenda. The city closed its shutters with the confidence of a practiced prayer. The bells did the arithmetic that made the hour. I sat at my desk and catalogued what could be owned by ink. Titles, call numbers, the satisfying machinery of a mind that still believes classification makes it sovereign. The list the prefect had given me lay open, its columns almost tender in their clarity. Item, destination, attendant. In the margin, a note, do not count the vials. The instruction throbbed as if printed in blood rather than red ink. I looked up from the list and found that the room had made itself smaller again, or that I had made myself larger. I have never been good at that geometry. I will not dramatize the moment I decided the book with its scarlet veins had more right to my hands than my hands had to their innocence. Decisions rarely arrive as music. They arrive as the absence of music, as a click barely audible over the habit noise. I folded the list into the notebook, slid both into the sleeve, stood, and left my lamp burning a small crime that always feels like a prayer. The stairwell received me as if it had anticipated the shape of my descent. The handed gate did not resist. It neither locked me out nor welcomed me in. It behaved like a door that remembers it is a lung. When it opened, the air came and went, and with it, the mild chime of glass resting against glass. This time, the room did not underwhelm. The crate had been moved. The table had been wiped. The lamp had learned to glow as if it were a throat humming. The book lay where no hand would fail to see it. A courtesy, or a dare. I went to it, and in the motion of reaching, I believed I heard again that distant almost bell half a strike, the punctuation of something that refused to end cleanly. I took the book in both hands and felt the familiar treachery of affection for an object. I do not apologize for that. Love is not always wise, but it is almost always accurate about what it wants. I opened to the page where the threads tugged at the gutter. Dates without years, places without maps, a third column that is better described than transcribed. The scar at my thumb woke fully now, a sympathetic ache, and for a moment, a measurable, humiliating moment. I thought of pressing it to the margin to see whether the page would drink. I did not. I am confessing to you the kind of almost that makes men susceptible to bargains. At the bottom of the page, faint as if written by a hand that had learned to be careful too late, a line of text in a language I think was meant for the mouth rather than the eye. I mouthed it. The lamp lowered in obedience. The air took on that pollen-dry sweetness again, and I understood that something not present had been invited to remember how to be present. The fear that came then was not melodrama, it was arithmetic. I realized that if I turned the next page, the page would turn me. I closed the book. There are doors you open. There are doors you leave ajar. There are doors you hold with your body because you are not yet sure whether to go through or to keep out what would use your hesitation to introduce itself. I stood with the book closed and felt that I was the door, and that the room was not especially interested in whether I chose to be open or shut. It simply needed me to be a threshold. That is what custody is. Not a lock, a hinge. I replaced the book. I left the room as I had found it, save for a few rearranged motes of dust that had learned my breath. On the stair, I passed a brother wool cassock, leather vambrace under the sleeve. Eyes kind in the way a sheath is kind to what it holds. He inclined his head a fraction, a gesture that allowed me to imagine we had not seen each other. "Do not count the vials," he said, without slowing. His voice carried the texture of a hymn hummed backward. I did not turn. You learn not to turn. Turning changes the geometry of a corridor in ways that cannot be repaired. In my room, the notebook waited with the loyalty of a dog that has learned how to be patient without understanding why. I wrote exactly 7 words. I am a hinge. The room knows. Then I closed the notebook and set it beneath the lamp so that the warmth would tell it had been witnessed. I tried to pray. The words came, but they behaved like visitors staying for too short a visit to justify conversation. Sleep, when it came, did not argue. It installed itself. The dream returned with its diligent loop. The silver plate at eye level had been polished. My reflection in it was not my face, but a page with letters running backward along veins. The inscription below the plate combined the old and the new. Memoria ordo est. Memoria orbis est. Memory is order. Memory is the world. I woke with my mouth tasting of coin again, and my first thought was not piety but inventory. Add taste to the list. I know what you fear, that this is melodrama dressed in linen, that my language is a penance for a sin I cannot name. Maybe, but I have not asked you to believe. I have asked you to remember what it feels like when a room knows you before you know yourself. If you have never felt that, forgive me the length of this confession. If you have, then, without either of us admitting it aloud, you understand already why I will go down again, and why the door, meant not to be opened, was made with a handle warm as a hand. Do not worry. I am not yet asking you to follow. I am asking you to keep one detail: the taste of old coins and wet limestone. If, in the days to come, a bell in your city hesitates by half a strike, do not shrug. Half strikes are how rooms announce their intentions when they are too well-mannered to shout. When you hear one, look for a corridor that loops. If you find a silver plate at eye level, read the line even if it is scratched and small. If the words tell you that memory is order, ask what has been ordered and by whom. If the words tell you that memory is the world, ask which world and whose. I said at the start that silence was enforced. Perhaps that is too cruel. Perhaps it is curated, the way a museum curates by deciding which rooms connect and which doors remain shut. Either way, I am done lending my breath to the hush that protects edits. The handed gate will open again. I no longer know whether I am guarding the threshold or being trained by it. In the morning, I will resume the courteous lies of ledgers. Tonight, I will let the lamp burn smaller than a coin and listen to the building think. If I sleep, I will count my steps in the dream, even though I was told not to. Counting fixes a thing to a number. Numbers can be discovered. Sometimes discovery is the only prayer that makes a sound. And if, in that prayer, I hear the half strike again, I will go. I will go because obedience, left unattended, becomes amnesia. And because the scar at my thumb has learned a vocabulary that the rest of me is tired of mispronouncing, and because the book-stitched veins, patient as a held breath, has chosen me the way locked rooms choose men who still believe, inventory is a path toward truth. I know better now. Inventory is a path toward thresholds. Truth begins when you admit you are the hinge. There is a difference between a room that hides and a room that edits. A hiding room closes itself like a shell. An editing room remains open, inviting, almost proud because it knows that every object inside has already been arranged to say a particular sentence. The archivum secretum was not a shell, it was grammar. A syntax of drawers and chains and ledgers that taught the eye which clauses to accept and which silences to admire. Men kneeled in churches above. Down here, we kneeled to classifications. I became, at first, a courier of those sentences, a runner between rooms. I carried listless bundles in my sleeves, petitions folded into fourths, the brittle bloom of a dried seal pressed to a page so often that the page wore the memory of a ring. Running teaches you the shortest routes. Routes become maps. Maps become habits. And habits, this is the confession, become the leash you later pretend is a rosary. The day I learned the taste of iron properly, the prefect called it a minor rite. He said it like one says, "Take a coat, it's raining." We stood at a table whose scratches had learned to be polite. A ledger lay open, its paper the kind with the faint powdery feel of honesty. He drew my hand forward with 2 fingers under my wrist, a gesture that always reads as paternal and always is administrative. The pen's nib was clean, its reservoir was not. "Just a drop," he said. "Blood binds memory to duty." The way he smiled said, "And duty unbinds memory from doubt." But he did not have to say that part. The room said it for him. I will not pretend I fought it. I wanted belonging, the way a key wants a door. I wanted a sentence to finish me. I pricked. The drop settled where hundreds had before, and the page drank with the patient thirst of a desert that knows rain will come only at signatures. The iron found my tongue as if it had been waiting there, uninvited and inevitable. "Good," the prefect murmured, pressing the ring beside my name so that the paper's shallow flesh kept a scar of authority. A simple circle with 2 interior lines crossing, a wound measured with a compass, not a cross, a geometry. From then, the building introduced me to the parts of speech that obeyed it. There were chained books, their bindings pleated like knuckles, their plates heavy as a memory you wish were lighter. The chains did not mean dangerous. Chains meant index. Which shelves, which hands, which hour of retrieval. The chains were simply visible permission. The dangerous items this took me longer to notice were unchained, modest, slipped between ledgers with titles like Candela et Panis, Candles and Bread, or Sandalium, Sandals, issued, as if the sacred had learned to mimic the domestic. I learned to read negative space. The real secret rarely said hush. It said, of course, and waited for your eyes to tire. In the candle room, the wax had its own weather. People imagine holiness smells of lilies. Down here, holiness smelled of tallow grown careful, oil rescued from rancor by discipline, wick braided by fingers that did not tremble because trembling wastes time. I loved the candle room with a fidelity that embarrasses me now. Counting wicks steadied me. Replacing stubs felt like mercy. In the inventory book, I learned the humiliation of certainty. You can know exactly how many flames a place permits, and remain ignorant of the one flame that matters. Between runs, I was sent to the map corridor, a spine of stone flanked by frames like obedient windows. The oldest maps had been scrubbed of their particularities, and then re-inked with decorations that did not navigate so much as reassure, cartouches with angels leaning over oceans that had never required them, scrollwork like vines on coastlines, trimmed to fit a doctrine of tidiness. Tucked behind them, in sleeves pretending to be dust, were the maps I came to love wrong by the standard we taught upstairs, right in the way that disobedience is right. 2 inlets on a coast where one exists now, a sandbar where a cathedral market stands, a mountain less proud than it is in the official atlas. In the lower margins, feast days as dates, mapped on St. Wenceslas's vigil, completed the day before St. Catherine, a calendar's liturgy used as coordinates, the world measured not in longitude but obedience. I did not keep these discoveries to myself. That is not a virtue. It is naivete. I asked questions softly, the way a servant clears his throat, so he can ask if the master wants more wine. Why is there an inland sea here? I said to a brother whose wool sleeve was worn to a shine where his arm met the table. He lay a finger on the map, not the sea, the compass rose. Sometimes the rose must be turned, he said, a kindness shaped to fit a threat. The ship will never feel the difference if we turn the map firmly enough. He did not say we like a conspiracy. He said it like a job. The brothers of custody, though they disliked to be called an order, because orders are traceable, moved differently in the archive than we clerks did. We drifted, they arranged. At night they wore leather vambraces under their sleeves, inked with letters that had learned to walk backward. You could hear their approach by a 2-note hum that kept time with steps, a music that understood corridors better than the men did. When a relic needed moving bones in a silk-lined case, a vial labeled only lacrima, the hum sharpened. Do not count, one told me, his thumb a pressure against my wrist like a seal without wax. Counting makes a number. Numbers invite discovery. I learned to call that doctrine the mercy of vagueness. My dreams, after the blood signature, wore armor. I would run the same loop left, arch, alcove. Left, arch, alcove, until the dream forgot it was a dream and called itself policy. The silver plate at eye height announced a rule every night. At first, memoria ordo est, memory is order. Weeks later, with an impatience that made the letters look hand-cut, memoria orbis est, memory is the world. I would wake tasting parchment and iron, the taste of a page that has accepted too many apologies. You will want me to hurry to the astral clock because it proves something. I am sorry. The clock never proved anything. It behaved, it paused, if you will allow me that verb. It missed a minute, then compensated. Once, at noon, the sun struck its brass with such calculation that the zodiac's teeth seemed to bite time rather than measure it. The sacristan, a man who loved recentering the universe with a shrug, called it calibration. He blamed humidity, which we blame when we mean mystery and cannot admit it. The ledger in which I tracked candle wicks and sandals learned a new trick. Entries migrated. A list from 1,000, 1582, found a home beside 1584, and pretended it had always lived there. The binding did not change. The pagination did not learn new arithmetic. When I held the page in my hands, the weight argued for yesterday. When I placed it back, the number argued for today. When I asked, the clerk said, "Restoration." He used the tone I later came to call anesthesia, the kindness that puts you to sleep so surgery can continue. I kept a notebook because paper betrays slowly. In it, I wrote what my eyes knew, and my voice was not yet willing to confess. A bell that half struck a note that began, then lost conviction. A corridor where the lamps had learned to make halos of precisely the same diameter. A ring that left an impression on wax only sometimes, as if authority had to choose when it wanted to be visible. At the top of a page, in a hand that looked older than my own, I found I had written, "I am a hinge." I do not remember writing it. I recognize it as true. They brought me, at dusk, on a damp day, to a room with no saint. It had been a chapel once. There were the ghosts of frescoes, the redness of long-dead pigment, like a bruise that refuses to explain itself. A brother stood waiting, with a book covered in plain calf. Plainness is a costume. He opened to a score written mirror-wise, notes that would be singable if your mouth could read glass. The caption in rubric, "Ad claustra caeli, unto the locks of heaven." "We sing this with our backs to the altar," he said, not proudly, not ashamed, for movement. Movement of what? He did not specify. Listen. He hummed 3 notes, then reversed them. The room cooled in a way no draught explains. I heard, as you hear your own name in a crowded station when no one has spoken it, a melody I recognized from dreams. The reverse hymn did not unlock heaven. It marked which objects would move unwitnessed, marked which stories would be renamed ceremony. "Why reverse?" I asked. He tilted his head as if adding up a mercy. "Because forward leaves footprints, and as 70 feet jar grade." When I emerged, the Portamana's stair smelled not only of old coin and wet limestone, but of pollen, that dry sweetness underground flowers use to remind the dark that light exists. I did not know then that I would come to trust that smell more than I trusted any face. The Saint Register taught me the manner in which a name can be misfiled into extinction. The tabs were steel, slim as the edge of a secret, sliding to conceal lines of text until a saint disappeared without ever having been erased. "We do not remove a saint," a brother explained with the patience reserved for the newly obedient. "We defer him." He showed me a woman's name, her sandals still wet with clay in the note, a detail you do not invent, who had fled a plague and taught 3 villages to boil water before prayer. "She compromised a miracle," he said, stroking the tab down until her life shortened to a line. "We do not deny, we wait." Deferral is a tomb that pretends to be a bench. In a drawer labeled Instrumentum, there lived what the ledger called an astral lens. Not glass, not mirror, a polished basalt that refused to show my face unless I managed not to want it. Its edge was toothed, like a saw made to carve not wood but certainty. "Too dangerous to use," murmured the prefect when he saw me hesitate over it. "It magnifies the wrong things." "Which things?" He was kind enough to answer. "Doubt." They set it behind a grill and kissed the frame as if it had become sacred by being untouchable. Science made into relic is one of the oldest disguises. By then, I had also learned the geometry of refusal. If you want to lose a fact without breaking it, you do not burn a book. You reshelve it between bread and candles. You let boredom do the work of censorship. You do not ban a melody. You write a counter-melody that sounds useful. You do not strike a line. You tab it, so that future obedience can call the omission a formatting choice. The popes that weren't. You want me to name them? I will give you one without giving you one. The page existed at dawn. It was gone by vespers. In the margin, next to a succession smoother than a clock's lie, someone had written and then crossed out, "A clean line is more pious than a true one." I stared until the indent of the crossed-out sentence told the truth the ink would no longer tell. I thought of thread raised like veins on a book's spine. I thought of blood turned into red ink by ceremony. I returned to the map corridor alone, and stood before two atlases, twins in binding and almost twins in world. In the first, a harbor frothed with sandbars. In the second, the sand had been persuaded to be a memory. In the first, a capital stood where long caravans could converge. In the second, the capital had drifted 20 miles, perhaps to better serve a pilgrimage that needed a story. The margins of the first bore prayers next to comets. The second bore stamps rings pressed into paper with the bureaucracy of blessing. Neither lied. One prepared the other. When the inventory bell halved itself again one strike, then the ghost of the second my thumbscar woke. I went to the handed gate without a key, and found the door warm, which is not a miracle if a corridor has a bone-deep habit of breath. I listened, far beyond the door. A glass conversation, vials in a crate negotiating their little collisions. The list in my sleeve, in the tidy fetch and carry hand of the prefect, warned me, "Do not count the vials." The sentence felt like a prayer that terrified itself. I did not open the door. I did not need to. I knew the shape of the night, without seeing its face. I tell you these pieces not because each is astonishing, but because astonishment is how they keep you from adding pieces up. The archive was not a cave of wonders. It was a workflow. The brothers of custody did not guard God. They guarded edits. They were courteous about it. Courtesy prevents riots better than chains. They wrapped bones in silk like apologies. They hummed the reverse hymn under their breath, with the spirit of men timing their steps to a companion's limp. They believed themselves merciful. Some of them were. I was in the ledger room when a novice, young enough to still believe, questions our currency, asked why a particular saint's day had been moved to avoid an eclipse. The elder brother placed his palm flat on the table and said, "Because providence is easier to maintain than predictability." He did not smile. He did not threaten. He simply expressed a principle, the way a mason taps a stone to ask if it will join the wall. The novice nodded and learned something he will believe, he discovered himself later, that calendars are levers, and that if you move the fulcrum delicately enough, an empire tips its weight without knowing its posture has changed. I had not yet decided to become disobedient. That verb presumes too much agency. Disobedience arrived like music from another room that you keep pretending not to hear until your foot has been keeping time for a quarter hour. The list in my sleeve grew a shadow list in my notebook. Items not to count, days that returned their minutes, names that behaved shy yet stubborn, hymns that faced away, maps that were right twice, once before the edit and once after a disaster made the edit true. There is a doctrine we did not write and we did not speak, but we served. Defer, rename, reframe, repeat. On a rain-bent evening, I was asked to deliver a slip to a door with no plate. The corridor beyond spared itself the expense of lamps. I thought at first that the dark was strategy. It was, in fact, economy. If you do not light a room, you do not have to defend what the light would reveal. A man stood within, a brother by the angle of his silence. He did not invite me. He received me the way a ledger receives numbers, without character, with purpose. "Read," he said, and placed in my hand a folio whose corner was dog-eared by someone who believed habit makes secrecy less exhausting. The folio contained staging notes for a calendar correction that would occur years hence. Nothing scandalous if you think history is a patient animal, but the notes told which feasts to shift, which eclipses to recalculate, how to align a coronation with a fast, so that rebellion would feel like the wrong mood. There were public narratives in the margin, phrases to be fed to pulpits, school primers to be revised so maps became decorations, hagiographies to be commissioned so that a woman who heated water to save her village would be remembered for a vision instead. I felt the old drop of blood at my thumb pull, as if the page had found in me a reservoir it wished to sip. I said, because I had become a man who asks the obvious question last. "Why me?" He answered, as if I had asked why now. "Because you remember in the correct direction." He did not clarify. He did not need to. There is remembering that moves inward, collapsing experience into self. There is remembering that moves outward, collapsing self into the map. They wanted the second thing. They wanted a hinge they could oil once and then forget. I carried the folio back with the reverence you give a fragile lie. In the cataloging room, the prefect signed for its return without looking. "How did it feel?" he asked again. The question he asks when he wants to see if the temperature has changed. "Smaller than I imagined," I said, because that sentence always earns a nod. "Good," he said. The most consequential geographies often begin as disappointments. That night, the reverse hymn leaked through stone like a piped scent. I do not know who sang it. I know I stood with my back to my door and hummed forward, simply to feel the correction in my chest. My lamp lowered itself obligingly, a throat being quieted by a finger. And in that hush I understood something that felt like betrayal and relief simultaneously. The archive did not require belief from me. It required only accuracy. I was not being converted. I was being calibrated. So here is the confession I promised in the title of this chapter. The white collar has never been white. It is paper-colored. It stains like paper does, slowly, politely, with edges that persuade you have always been this shade. And the red ink, it does not shout. It binds. It says remember and means obey. The day would come when I would open the scarlet-stitched book and refuse to let the page drink me. But that day was not this day. This day, I learned the rhythm of obedience so well that later, disobedience could dance in time with it, and no one would hear the difference. I leave you, for now, with a small thing that was not small, the half-strike. It happened again as I wrote notes by lamp. That hesitant bell whose sound began like instruction and ended like doubt. I set down my pen. I did not stand. I counted my breaths as if they were vials. 1, 2, do not count the vials. 3, and then I wrote a single sentence in my notebook. If a bell can doubt, a building can remember. I did not know then that the sentence would be the key the door had been waiting for, not the metal key with the missing tooth. The sentence. Doors that are lungs do not open to metal, they open to pressure. The pressure of a mind that has finally learned to push in both directions at once. They disliked being called an order because orders could be traced, catalogued, and, eventually, blamed. They preferred service, a word that pretends to be smaller than it is. An order can be abolished from above. A service simply continues in the gaps, like water that knows the shape of the stone and keeps the shape for it when the stone forgets. You would pass them in daylight, thinking they were archivists whose backs had learned humility. You would meet them at night and understand that humility was a uniform. They wore wool, the color of decisions that have been made for you. Under the sleeves, when you caught the angle of an elbow as a lamp pulled it briefly into confession, you saw leather vambraces, not ornamental, inked with letters that walked backward like men returning from a pilgrimage they never announced. At their collars, no insignia. Their sign lived beneath the visible, two lines crossing inside a circle, not touching the rim, a geometry that looked like a wound measured with a compass. If you pressed your thumb to the impression left by their ring, you felt the paper remember a pressure, not a picture. The first time I carried a casket with them, the wood had a temper. It was not heavy the way weight is heavy. It was heavy the way names are heavy when you know you will have to keep them. The lid rattled gently with the conversational politeness of glass inside. A brother older, kind in the way a sheath is kind to its knife, set his thumb on my wrist. "Do not count," he said, not as a reprimand, but as a blessing he did not trust me to deserve. I wanted to say I was not counting. The want itself proved I was. We moved down the corridor that loops when it has decided your purpose suits its shape. The lamps, as always, had learned to make halos of an earnest diameter. Our steps, theirs disciplined, mine learning the discipline, fell into that two-note hum they prefer when viols are in company. The hum wasn't song. It was a way of holding the room still without asking the room to try. At the turn where the wall sweats, a draft of pollen pushed against our faces, dry as an old secret and twice as careful. I felt the casket shift toward it, as if the glass inside had heard some rumor of spring. The destination was a chapel that had lost its saint. Once the fresco had told a simple storybook in hand, miracle in margin, a face that promised the future would be kind. Time had taught the pigment another grammar. Red had soured to bruise, blue receded like an apology. In the apse, a grill waited with the confidence of business, not worship. We set the casket behind it, on a slab that had been engineered to look ancient. The brother's hand left my wrist. In its place, I felt the memory of a pressure, a phantom ring. "Here," he said, "science is safe." He did not blink at the cost of that sentence. We all paid it in installments. The inventory bell halved itself. Far away one strike and the ghost of the second, and I watched the brothers look at the air the way shepherds watch weather. "Timing," one murmured, as if the bell were a colleague. "We move on the half." We did. I learned later that half strikes make decent covers. No neat chime to hang a memory on, no full note to be matched in the recollection of witnesses. The ear shrugs, the act completes. That night, I returned to the map corridor with the new muscle memory of carrying what you're not supposed to count. There were 2 atlases open on the table, twins in binding, siblings in lies. A brother stood at the window like a man letting the outside think it had been invited. He did not look at me. "What do you see?" he asked. The right answer to this question is always, "What do you see?" The correct answer is always yours. "In this one," I said, touching the left atlas where my shadow made the sea darker, "a harbor fractures the coast sandbars like teeth. In the other, the sand has learned obedience." He nodded. "Good. Now look again." I did. The coast tilted a degree when I admitted to myself that it had. The capital moved, not on the page, but in my memory of it, as if the small city had agreed to be closer to a story that needed pilgrims. "It's the same map," I said, "because we speak in paradoxes down here when a clean sentence would turn an edit into an accusation." "It's the later map first," he said, and closed the earlier one, as if teaching me to close a door on doubt. "This one will be shown upstairs. That one will be shown to the printer." "Why?" I asked, not because I expected an answer that would forgive us, but because I needed to hear the shape of our sin in someone else's mouth. "Because the calendar prefers tidy coastlines," he said. "Because processions are hard to choreograph when fishermen keep being right." He said right, as if it were an impolite talent. "Because maps are not for finding, they are for returning." We returned to the corridor where the Saint Register lives, like a patient dragon. Tabs of steel slid in their grooves, with the elegant stubbornness of machinery that knows it outlasts operators. "We do not erase," the brother said, lifting a tab with 2 careful fingers and letting it fall to hide the name it had revealed. "We defer." The name beneath was a woman I had come to respect through notations, the kind of saint the world makes when it is tired of being explained to. "Why defer her?" I whispered. "Because some questions are more difficult when asked aloud. Because she solved a problem with boiling water, not angels," he said. "Because she taught a method that does not require us." He slid the tab down and sealed the drawer, as someone closes a child's eyes before teaching a lesson. "She will return," he added, and his kindness made the promise sound like mercy when it was merely patience with a schedule. We passed a niche where a shattered statue base had learned to pretend it had always been a shelf. On it, a small mirror shard leaned against the stone. I saw my face, edited by the triangle of glass, my collar a white punctuation, my eyes a footnote. I lifted my hand and watched letters walk backward along my veins, faint as if written in evaporating ink. I wiped. They obeyed not by vanishing, but by learning to be less certain. "There is a right," the brother said as we walked, "that people misunderstand. They imagine oaths are ropes. We prefer threads." We turned into a room whose door had the humility to be ordinary. On a table, a coil of scarlet thread weighted no spool, just a loop pretending not to be a knot. Beside it, a ledger whose margin had been fattened with pricks more than signatures. "Blood for memory," he said. "Not as instruction, as weather. Memory for order. Order for peace." He watched me as he said peace, the way one watches a dog before giving it a bone it might not deserve. "And if the peace is false?" I asked. "A sentence that either proves courage or inattention. Then the order must be cleaner," he said. "So the memory will prefer it." He took a needle, thin as a whisper, used to sew truth to appearance, and let it hover over his own skin, close enough to be real, far enough to remain principle. "We do not make people forget. We invite them to remember the safe version first." He put the needle down. "It usually suffices." We went to a chapel that had learned to keep its frescoes to itself. 5 brothers and I stood in a semicircle with our backs to the altar. One began the reverse hymn barely above breath, 3 notes forward, 3 notes back, a tide that insists on being counted even when you promise not to. The sound of it lowered the lamps. The room cooled to the degree that makes paper decide it is more vellum than wood. The hymn doesn't open anything. It marks, it tells the building which object belongs to the next movement, and which story must retitle itself. When they finished, a brother touched the grill with 2 fingers, the way one might touch a forehead in blessing. "We do not trap things," he said. "We teach them to stay." "Why teach them to stay?" "Because staying makes a record," he half smiled, "and records can be curated." On a rain-bruised afternoon, a cart arrived from a door that does not admit it has a street behind it. 3 crates, one narrow, one long, one small that seemed to shrink as you looked at it, as if sight were a weather that eroded wood. The manifests smiled a vocabulary of grocery linen, stone fragments, devotional instruction, the blandness that hides weights. The small crates seal the 2 lines within the circle looked tired, the wax gray like ash that misses its fire. We took it below on the half-strike, the world politely indifferent to our timing. Inside, a book, not the one from the first room, but its twin swollen as if it had been drowned and then persuaded back toward dryness. Scarlet threads stitched the spine so tightly the boards arched. The title, Custodia Hominum, the custody of men. The paper pulsed when the lamp leaned toward it. "We should not open it," a brother said. He did not say yet, but the word lived there, breathing. "Then why bring it here?" I asked. "Because safety is not a place," he said. "It is a sequence." We did not open it. We placed it on the slab behind the grill with the ceremony of men who needed ceremony to convince themselves that waiting was a decision and not a fear. I signed the ledger that says movement without saying meaning, and the ring left an impression this time, a crisp geometry that felt like a promise too confident for its own good. When we left, the astral clock stuttered up the stairwell. A minute dropped, a minute regained. The sacristan, the priest of excuses, called it humidity again, and winked, because humor makes compliance feel like a personality trait. Weeks in, I learned the jobs that make a mythology operational. One brother, in particular, narrow shoulders, broad attention, taught me to pack bones the way you pack arguments, buffers at points of contact, gentle pressure, wrap what could rattle until it learns to agree with itself. Treat nothing as breakable, he said. Treat it as remembering how to be whole. He showed me how to label nothing with everything. A crate chalked lignum sacrum, sacred wood, might hold a lens that magnifies doubt, or a fossil that teaches a fresco to be embarrassed. Names are temperatures, he said, flicking chalk dust off his fingers. We cool what would ignite too easily. Another brother, younger, possessed the careful hunger of a student who fears his intelligence will be seen before his loyalty. He guided me through the corridors that loop intentionally, architectures of confusion that protect rooms, not by hiding them, but by repeating the approach, until the impatient turn back. What if someone counts the turns? I asked. He smiled the smile of a man who loves a sly geometry. Then we let the corridor be counted, and we changed the start. He tapped the silver plate at eye height, the one that sometimes says Memoria Ordo Est, and sometimes Memoria Orbis Est. When the inscription changes, the world changes. The corridor only agrees. They trained me to carry a story the way we carry a relic. with the palms open, thumbs pressed to edges, pressure distributed so that a box does not learn to hate your grip. You do not hurry. Hurry is how you drop names. Hurry is how you break a veneration into a controversy. Never arrive on time, one said, as we moved a case that hummed faintly as if bees had learned to be glass. Arrive on the half, I asked. Because bells hesitate? He replied. Because memory does. I watched a brother undo a tab in the Saint Register and refast it in the same motion, a sleight of hand that taught the name beneath to accept its own postponement as a virtue. We defer, he said again, weary. Not defensive. We defer because the mind loves order more than truth. Give it the order first, and the truth will come with less blood. There it was, the ethic that lets gentle men perform violence with a clean conscience. I nodded, as if I agreed, because through a door you cannot kick, you must be invited. One evening, when thunder shivered frames on the walls, and the stone floors grew the sweat of old weather, I found the younger brother alone in the grill chapel, seated on the slab with his legs a penitent tangle. The lamp near him had lowered itself into that blue you see when a flame doubts. The custodia hominum lay shut, the threads a red horizon he did not cross. He was humming not the reverse hymn, but forward, then backward, then forward again, as if negotiating with himself. Does it ever trouble you, I asked, that a good edit and a good lie share a silhouette? He regarded me as if I were a mirror that had learned to ask questions. It troubles me that the world loves tidy stories and calls them mercies, he said. It troubles me more that untidy stories make widows of nations. He ran a fingertip along the scar at the base of his thumb. We are here to prefer the wound that can be bound. Bound with blood, I said, eyeing the scarlet thread. Bound with memory, he corrected. Then, after a breath, sometimes with blood. The popes that weren't returned to me like a debt. The page that had existed at dawn and not at vespers left an indent in my thoughts, a place where an erasure had weight. A clean line is more pious than a true one, someone had written in a margin, then crossed out, the crossing deeper than the line itself, as if the pen was ashamed of the sentence it corrected. I told the elder brother I had seen it. He closed his eyes as if listening to a distant device. Some lines must be straight, he said. This city is built on curves. Straight lines prevent falling. He touched the vambrace under his sleeve. We stand where errors would slip. If you are waiting for me to hate them, understand this. Hatred is an easy clarity. What I felt was recognition that their virtues had been recruited into a machine that rewards them with purpose in exchange for accuracy without pity. A man can live an entire life inside such a bargain and be thought holy by his neighbors. I might have, if not for the half-strike. It came again, a hesitation that taught the bell its doubt and taught me an answer I had not wanted. The brothers looked up in the same instant with the reflex of men who have agreed to become instruments. Movement, one said, not people. The room grew tidy with intention. Vials, bones, books, the world reduced to carryable nouns. I stepped toward the slab, as if invited by the absence of invitation. The younger brother lifted the custodia hominum an inch no more and set it down again, the way a man tests a tooth he hopes is not loose. Not tonight, he said. The sequence is not ready. Sequence, I repeated, trying to fix the taste of the word in my mouth so I would know it later in other flavors. Call it peace if it helps, he replied, and I watched his mouth shape a word that told the truth about his hope and a lie about its cost. We walked the casket back the way we had come, the hum measured, the glass inside agreeing with each step. At the turn where the wall sweats, I felt the corridor's loop tilt again, as if two beginnings had learned to coexist. The silver plate flashed at eye height. Memoria ordo est. I blinked. It read, Memoria orbis est. I blinked again. It had not changed. I had. That is the worst part of a good edit. When it is complete, your mind believes it helped. In my room, I opened the notebook to the page where I had once written, I am a hinge. Beneath it, I added, they are hinges pretending to be locks. I underlined, pretending until the paper bored of my insistence and threatened to tear. I wrote the sequence as I understood it, then defer, rename, reframe, repeat, and left space beside each verb for times and places I would fill in when I had the courage to steal them. I looked at the scar at my thumb and said, aloud, because speaking makes a vow, even when you deny it, I will count the vials. The air tightened, as if the room had learned a new posture. The next day, the prefect handed me a list in the generous hand of a man who has convinced himself that generosity is protection. Do not count the vials, it said again. Do not write the names that have no day. Do not read the hymn facing forward. Do not map the corridor as a line. He did not look at me when I looked at the list. Diligence, he said, as if he were recommending a wine. It is the virtue that prevents accidents. I nodded with my mouth. With my hands, I folded the list into the notebook, where disobedience grows its roots. At dusk, I found the younger brother on the stair to the portamanis with his palm on the stone, as if taking its pulse. What do you hear? I asked. He tilted his head. A door that knows it is a lung, he said. And a building learning to breathe with it. He lowered his hand. When you go below, he added, not if, do not count, do not read forward, do not trust tidy. He paused, then performed the smallest act of treason a loyal man can manage. Advice. And when you must count, count wrong in the ledger, and right in your head. Why help me? I asked. Because mercy always makes me suspicious. He smiled without humor. Because the oath, he said softly, tapping his scar, binds memory to duty. It does not bind it to silence. That night, I went down alone. Not to steal, to learn the weight of a choice before the choice learned the weight of me. The door breathed. The lamp lowered itself into a listening flame. The room had been prepared in that kind way the service has when it wishes to make your crime feel almost permitted. The custodia hominum waited with its threads red as a thought you have told yourself not to think. I placed my thumb on the margin and felt the page recognize a scar from far away. I did not press. I did not open. I leaned, not with my body but with my mind, the way you lean into a wind to test its commitment. The book leaned back, and in that gentle pressure, I understood at last the purpose of the blood-bound knights. They were not guardians of faith. They were guardians of edits, not crusaders, but continuators. Not defending God, defending sequence. They carried not merely bones and vials and pages, but the timing by which a century would be remembered, the grammar by which a miracle would be preferred to a method, the temperature at which a discovery would be cooled into a relic and kissed instead of used. I left the room with empty hands. That is how you leave when you intend to return. On the stair, the bell offered me a half-strike like a secret handshake. I felt in my blood the reply, and the reply was count. not the vials, not the bones, not the days. Count the half notes that build a melody. Count the edits that never say their names. Count the threads that pretend not to be knots. Above, the city carried on with its tidy stories. Below, we arranged tidiness for it. Between, I learned what I was, not a lock, not a key, a hinge, and if a hinge can learn to hesitate just half a breath, then a door that was never meant to open can remember how. I used to think a lie, to be effective, had to be large, something operatic, emperors, edicts, bonfires that teach the night to kneel. In the archive, I learned the opposite. The best lie is granular. You don't replace a century, you salt it. You don't burn a name, you shelve it between two that bore you. You don't forbid a melody, you reverse it so the mouth learns to sing politely against itself. The brothers of custody did not act like villains or saints. They moved like editors who believed that mercy requires continuity, and continuity requires edits. The first layer is phantom time. People think it means inventing years that never happened. It is subtler. Phantom time is redistributed. Noticing you don't add years so much as you move attention across them the way a chess player moves a piece to control a square he will never occupy. In a folio dog-eared by a practical thumb, the margins gave staging notes for the calendar that would change after I was dead. The notes were never dramatic. Advance feast of street. Martin by 1 week in districts affected by grain shipments. Recalculate eclipse tables to avoid correspondence with planned coronation. Align jubilee with harvest surplus for public relief. A man could read those and other. Believe the church benevolent, which is how the lie survives inspection. What the notes did in their total was turn days into levers. Move a fast day here, the rebellion there arrives hungry and tired. Shift the anniversary there, a widow finds her grief conveniently liturgical and less available to politics. You do not invent time you can't afford. You schedule memory. The second layer is locked names. We do not erase, we defer. If you have never withdrawn your hand politely from a handshake, you began and watched the other person believe they made the choice. First, you do not yet understand our technique. In the Saint Register, the steel tabs are thin enough to be kind. Slide one down, and a life is shelved without being slain. A village healer who boiled water before prayer, deferred. A scholar who wrote the paths of stars as lines obedient to laws, deferred. An abbot who taught children to ask first and kneel later, deferred. The miracle never denied, just rescheduled until the century prefers a different posture. And sometimes, let this be admitted, the person returns. A famine remembers her kettle. A plague remembers his soap. We canonize later with a cleaner narrative, and the world says amen because it has learned to love tidy utility more than accurate gratitude. The third layer is the reverse hymn. It is not magic, it is logistics disguised as piety. Sung with backs to the altar, notes mirror-wise. It does not open doors. It marks objects and hours for movement that will leave no confession behind. The hymn lives in the throat at the exact pitch at which lamps lower low enough to make a room think you have become careful. Its genius is theft of direction. Sing forward and a melody leaves footprints. Sing backward and the floor forgets where you came from. A marked relic will pass through 3 corridors and 5 hands and end exactly where it should be if someone visited a year later to check. And yet the intervening week will leave less evidence than humility leaves in a scandal. Once you understand the layers, you start to see their interleaving everywhere. The astral clock that pauses by a minute at noon and reclaims that minute from the dusk calibration, the sacristan insists, with the lazy authority of a man who loves that word. The bell that half strikes, not an error, a cover that denies the hour the dignity of a whole memory. The maps that duplicate themselves into nearly identical twins, one honest to a sandbar, the other courteous to a procession. The ledger that hosts a page from 1582 beside 1584 and calls it restoration so no one must say reclassification. The ring that seals a page only sometimes, because authority prefers selectivity over habit. I learned to test these layers like a locksmith tests a rumor. In the map corridor, I set the twin atlases open a ritual of comparison that felt like prayer without absolution. In the first, a harbor's teeth, those sandbars fishermen swear exist, even when cartographers suffer from calendar. In the second, the coast had been persuaded into an easier sentence. In the first, the capital city hugged the caravan roads. In the second, it had drifted 20 miles to better serve a pilgrimage route that required it for a story. The margins told the truth about their intentions. Prayers by comets in the first, ring stamps in the second. You do not need to choose which is a lie. You need only recognize which one will be shown to students. In the Saint Register, I began to notice indentations beneath the tabs, impressions of names I could not read unless I delayed the drawer halfway, left it in that impolite state between open and shut. The brother who watched me watching smiled with the tired affection of a man who remembers his own first sin. Half open is how you learn, he said. Half open is also how accidents happen. He slid the drawer fully closed with a palm that loved its own patience. We prefer accidents to accident. I later learned to translate, let grammar do the violence, so that no one must. About phantom time there is a thing no treatise admits. We did not merely move feasts and eclipses, we moved birthdays and burials. In the ledger of a hill town whose church leaked from its eaves in every season, I found an annotation. Infants baptized on the Transfiguration shall be entered as if on the Assumption in years of shortage. A small fiction, humanitarian on its face, tie parents' memory of a child to a later feast so that the child's first anniversary will include bread. Multiply such mercies by villages and decades. You do not invent time, you change the texture of loss. Grief that could have turned political becomes liturgical. The widow kneels on a schedule, and a schedule is easier to police than a heart. About locked names, there is a cruelty we called protection. A woman whose sandals were described as still wet with clay, in a note she had taught Wells to be clean, not miraculous. To keep shrines from losing income, we filed her under cautionary anecdotes, and we wrote a homily that credited an angel with instructing her to boil water. Agency is a delicate instrument, one brother told me, tabbing her life shut and blessing the drawer like a casket. If you give it to the wrong person, it plays for the wrong audience. The wrong audience, he meant, was the living poor who might repeat an example more readily than a vision. We did not deny her. We unfurnished the room where she might have been useful. About the reverse hymn, there is a physics. When sung backward, certain harmonics cancel attention. You hear sound, but you do not retain it. The brothers stood with their backs to the altar, not to insult devotion, but to face the door. Their voices carved channels in the air along which objects could be carried, while witnesses recalled only that singing had occurred. Once, I watched them mark not a relic, but a library ladder to move it without a change of noise, because the ladder's scraping had drawn questions the week before. A hymn to acoustic plausible deniability. If you think this trivial, you have not lived in a place where questions are inventory and inventory is a theology. It would be convenient if I could say, I opposed all this on first contact. I did not. Layer by layer, I caught myself agreeing the way a man agrees to be measured for a suit that will eventually be his uniform. Phantom time intended relief, locked names intended cohesion, the reverse hymn intended discretion. My complicity wore good intentions like armor, fitted by a patient tailor. Only when I saw the diagram, the one in the Custodia Hominum, did the armor begin to itch with a rash called honesty. We opened the book, yes, we did. One night, when the half-strike was joined by a stutter in the astral clock so defiant it felt like permission. The younger brother, who had never told me to disobey and had never told me not to, stood by the grill and watched the threads tremble. The title page pulsed a little, like a throat resisting a confession. Custodia Hominum, the custody of men. The first spread split into 3 columns: dates, names, public narratives. In the margins, a 4th, means. Every few lines, a line drawing of a small gear connected to a larger one. The image needed no caption. We were looking at the machine that makes history obedient. Under dates, the calm arithmetic of mercy. Shift bread feast forward by 6 days in districts with failing mills. Under names, the tidy violence. Defer canonization of Sister A until water purification can be drafted as angelic counsel. Under public narratives, the choreography of belief. Commission hagiography emphasizing vision over method. Prepare primer diagrams that treat maps as ornaments. Under means, the 4-fold flow. Archive school liturgy rumor. Arrows ran both ways. If one line broke, the others repaired memory. The diagram was elegant, which is the worst sin of certain diagrams. At the bottom of a page that coordinated an eclipse with a funeral and a riot with a feast, someone had written in a smaller hand, "We do this so history will not tear." Beneath it, in a different hand, smaller still, "We do this so people will not see the tear." Beneath that, scratched as if with a needle stolen from the thread, "We do this because we fear." This was not policy. It was conscience, caught in the act, and too embarrassed to sign. I closed the book because I liked the brothers less when I liked them most. That is to say, I liked their care. You cannot hate a man for trying to prevent panic during famine. You can hate the system that asks him to call agency heresy and curiosity rebellion. And if you are honest, you feel the system working in you, coaxing you toward the lazy affection of tidy. So, I conducted a trial in secret, not in a courtroom, but in a corridor. Over a week, I misshelved 3 things, as the brothers would misshelve them: a map that honored a sandbar, a pamphlet that instructed on boiling, a letter that recorded a half-strike at an hour it should not have occurred. I watched what the building did. The map, placed between candles and bread, started to smell like tallow in a day. The pamphlet, folded into a ledger of sandals, became a footnote, literally, its corner rubbed smooth by leather passing. The letter I hid in the back of a drawer learned to be apocryphal simply by becoming hard to fetch. I learned the mechanical truth that disgusted me with its competence. Things hidden by boredom stay hidden longer than things hidden by force. On the 7th night, the reverse hymn climbed the stairwell like smoke that has practiced. I stood with my back to my door and hummed forward, then back, counting because the oath told me not to. 7 notes out, 7 back, the lamp lowering as if pleased by my infidelity. Behind the hum, I heard the glass conversation that announces movement. I went to the portamanos without the key because keys have never mattered to doors that are lungs. The handle gave a fraction. The pollen smell, dry, sweet, underground blossom, met me like an old friend who has learned to keep secrets out of politeness. In the small room, the custodia hominum lay open to a page labeled Concordat of Memory. The diagram of flow, archive, school, liturgy, rumor had acquired a 5th arrow since we had last dared to look. Art. A note in the margin. If science discovered, curate as relic, then commission art to remember the feeling instead of the method. A further note. Paint the star as an angel to defer gravity into gratitude. I thought of a fresco in the chapel that had darkened into bruise. A saint holding a book with no letters. The book had once held laws. The paint had been taught to forget. "Do you see why we do it?" the younger brother asked, not demanding, not defensive. He traced the arrow from rumor back to archive. When panic closes the school and suspicion empties the pews, rumor is all we have left to carry memory. We must salt it with enough of our intention that it does not turn to venom. And in salting it, I said, we teach the mouth that spreads it to prefer us. He did not disagree. We also keep order, to adage, order that protects edits first. He looked at his vambrace letters walking backward along leather that had learned to love the wrist it obeyed. Sometimes, he said, sometimes, order that protects people first. He touched the scar at his thumb, the old sting of blood that told him duty and told him pain. Choose a riot you have lived through. Now imagine it on a feast. Which city burns longer? Neither should have burned, I said, the sentence of a man who knows that moral maxims are unaffordable in logistics. We returned the book to its slab, the grill teaching air to behave. On the stair, the astral clock sighed a minute into the wrong pocket of the hour and made change with bells. The sacristan would call it humidity. He would file time under weather. I could not unsee the arithmetic. A calendar that timed obedience, a registry that filed agency, a hymn that edited the acoustics of witness. After that night, I began to test memory against paper, the way you test a bridge's strength, by stepping lightly at first, and then with the honest weight of a man who has stopped pretending. I wrote in my notebook only what the room could not read, even if it found it. Tastes iron, lime, tallow. Temperatures the blue when a flame doubts. The warm stone of a door's breathing seam half strikes at indecent hours. The shape of a corridor you cannot map because it reorders your steps when you name them. I avoided nouns the archive had jurisdiction over. I trusted verbs and adverbs, action and manner. They age slower, under surveillance. One afternoon, the kind of day rain licks stone into the color of regret. The prefect asked me, "What do you think we protect?" He asks questions like that when he needs to evaluate whether your obedience has acquired nuance or whether you have remained a blunt instrument. I answered, "Continuity." He nodded. "And if continuity requires correction," I said, "then we correct." He held my gaze. "And if correction requires forgetting?" I said the sentence I knew he wanted to test for firmness. "Then we remember forgetting." He smiled without involving the part of his face that tells the truth. "You will do," he said, "a benediction without God." At night, The silver plate at eye height resumed its old game, Memoria ordo est, one evening, Memoria orbis est the other. I learned to read it like a weather vane. Which way is the building blowing tonight? If it told me memory is order, I moved carefully. Order has teeth. If it told me memory is the world, I risked more. The world has places to hide. The plate never lied. It told me what the night wanted from the hinge I had agreed to be. Here is the worst truth I am willing to confess to you. For a time, I liked it. The competence, the precision, the quiet conviction that I stood in a narrow corridor between panic and oblivion, and that my hands could feel the weight distribution of bones in a case and know where to place the cloth so no glass would protest. To carry the edits of history is to feel necessary, and necessary is a narcotic more devout than incense. I liked it until a letter reached me through a route that pretended to be accidental. A parish on the coast had buried a girl during a storm and moved the anniversary of her death to a day that would fall under sun the next year. The priest wrote with a careful shame. The calendar was merciful. The mother's memory was not. The mother returned on the original day, alone, to a church that had no candles for her and a square that had market. She bought bread, the priest wrote, unable to forgive himself for the sentence. She said it tasted like betrayal. I held the letter until the ink smudged because my fingers had learned to sweat when I lied to myself. Phantom time does not simply spare cities' riots. It also rearranges the loneliness of mothers. After that, the layers no longer made sense neatly. The reverse hymn felt less like discretion and more like eraser dust. Locked names felt less like conservation and more like complications owed. Phantom time felt less like staging and more like withholding. I stopped counting my complicities in days and began counting them in half strikes. I am not here to tell you that I burned the book. I did not. We are past bonfire metaphors. I did something worse. I learned to open it fast and close it faster. To take a phrase, a drawing, a sequence, and memorize without leaving the room certain I had done so. I learned to hum the reverse hymn, and then, in the same breath, to sing it forward inside my mouth, a small treason no ledger can record. I learned to slide a tab halfway and leave it unconvincing, so that if questioned, I could say I was clumsy and not curious. Routine is the best mass curiosity ever invented. In the catalogue of sins, I will someday offer a God I no longer recognize. I will include one that resembles virtue too closely to feel safe. I taught another clerk how to read negative space. I showed him where bread and candles hide maps, where sandals rub pamphlets into footnotes, how a ring that seals only sometimes is more honest than one that seals always, how humidity is the season in which excuses set well. "Why are you teaching me this?" he asked, pencil poised above a blank line as if it could catch a conscience before it fell. "Because," I said, "the building is forgetting in a way that needs witnesses." He looked afraid in the right way. I am still deciding whether that fear was my crime or my alibi. On the night that closes this chapter, the bell tried to strike twice and confessed once. The astral clock lost 3 minutes and did not ask to be forgiven. The silver plate refused to be anything other than Memoria orbis est, as if the building itself had decided to tell the truth in a language it believed I could misinterpret. I went down to the Porta Manus with a sentence in my pocket instead of a key. If a bell can doubt, a building can remember. The handle warmed like a hand that has given up pretending it is metal. The room opened with its courteous sigh. I did not touch the custodia hominum. I touched the slab where it lay, the stone cool as a decision deferred. The brothers had marked the air with the reverse hymn earlier. The residue of the notes still tasted like copper and quiet. I stood there, counting because I must not. One breath for dates, one for names, one for narratives, one for means, one for art. On the sixth breath, I realized I had been wrong in a small but critical way. The arrows did not simply flow into rumor. They also flowed from rumor into dream. No pen had drawn it. The line simply existed on the page the way a memory exists after you have been told it never happened. Dream, then, is the fifth layer. Not the diagram's fifth arrow. Not art dream as infrastructure. A corridor that loops is a dream that has become confident. A bell that hesitates is a dream teaching a tower to mispronounce the hour. A map with twins is a dream of a world that could have been, and a world that was told it must be. A locked name is a dream of a saint naming herself elsewhere and finding the mouth that will speak her into use. The reverse hymn is a dream of unwitnessed movement. Phantom time is a dream of mercy that wants to be merciful without ever being brave. I walked back up, leaving the book unopened, because sometimes not touching is the only way to let a thing accuse you properly. The corridor remembered my feet. The plate watched me with its polite Latin. In my room, I wrote one line beneath, "I am a hinge." Hinges dream of doors that learn to open themselves. Then I blew the lamp down to a halo, small enough to balance on a question. If you are listening for a clean turn, a decision hammered like a nail, this is not that chapter. This is the chapter where the layers stop being craft and start being cost. This is the night I began to understand that even if you train a city to avoid panic by rearranging its anniversaries, you still owe the mother her sunless day. That even if you defer a saint because her method threatens income, you still owe the living the dignity of agency. That even if you hum a hymn backward to mark objects for movement without memory, you still owe witnesses the music they were born to keep. I remain what the building trained me to be, a hinge. But a hinge can rust in precisely the right place and teach a door to make a noise at the hour it was meant to be silent. The half-strike will come again. The clock will lose and find its minute. The plate will change, or I will. And when the sequence defer, rename, reframe, repeat asks me for my hands, I will decide whether my blood belongs to the threads or to the memory those threads were designed to embarrass. For now, I leave you with this. If you wake on a morning that feels misplaced by half an hour, if you find a feast where a funeral should have settled, if your city's map remembers a harbor no one sails anymore, do not seek fireworks. Seek files mislabeled as kindness. Seek songs sung backward by men who love their care more than they fear their edits. Seek names that are not missing but misfiled. And count what you must not because numbers save, but because counting is a way of refusing to be curated. We will need that refusal in the chapter to come. The machine has its climax too, and machines, when cornered by their own competence, begin to manufacture the emergency they were built to prevent. There are tools that announce themselves hammers, torches, edicts, and there are tools that pretend to be furniture. In the archive, the most obedient furniture was maps, succession lists, and instruments that looked like prayers with gears. Call them what they were. Levers you could hide in daylight. The brothers of custody coached me to carry them the way a surgeon is coached to carry doubt. Firmly enough to operate, gently enough not to confess. The map corridor was the friendliest room to the untrained eye. It resembled an old university's vanity frames. Thin dust, glass that tried not to glare, a long table where students might trace coastlines after vespers and feel they had rescued the world from fog. I had learned by then to distrust friendliness. On a rain-paled morning, I set 2 atlases open where the light equalized their lies. One was dated in a scholar's hand with a saint's vigil. The other bore no date at all, only the crisp oval of a ring pressed into the lower right corner, our geometry. 2 lines inside a circle. Between the covers, the earth performed its old trick. The first book honored a harbor's teeth, those sandbars fishermen swear about when cartographers are elsewhere. The second had smoothed the coast like a temple floor. In the first, the capital clung to caravan roads as a child clings to a sleeve. In the second, the capital had drifted east, politely, to serve a pilgrimage route the story needed. Which is true? The younger brother asked from the window, neither looking at me nor away the way a man observes weather he already trusts. Both, I said, disgusted at how quickly that answer arrived. One is true when boats vote, the other when bells do, he nodded. You're learning to hear which audience a truth belongs to. The scene loved the frame and round as I turned the page and found a margin confession I had not seen before. A faint pencil line, then an erasure, then faint again, as if a conscience had followed orders and then tried to reverse eraser dust back into lead. The sentence, recovered by angle and patience. Move the city where stories can reach it. I wrote it into my notebook with the perversity of a man copying his own indictment. Maps were the least intimate of our edits. Names were closer to the bone. The popes that weren't returned to me like a headache that prefers the afternoon. I had seen the page at dawn, read names that felt like marbles in my mouth, hard, undeservedly round, and then watched the list vanish by vespers, the ledger rebinding itself into innocence while the wax seal cooled like a small moon. The brothers pretended the page had never sat there. The paper did not. Paper remembers pressure if not ink. I sought the pressure where it is easiest to pretend you did not press, in the margins of succession frescoes. One chapel presents the lineage as a rope knot to knot faces in medallions, every man a bead on a string pulled tight enough to prevent history from fraying. Another chapel prefers a vine curlicues, leaves, faces like fruit. I climbed the scaffolding under pretense of dusting. Up close, I saw overpaint a halo nudged higher to accommodate a new forehead, a book on a lap now blank where letters had once insisted on gravity, a finger retouched to point at a different paragraph. You do not need to break a line to redirect it. Tilt the head, erase the letter, make the finger polite. What good does this do? I asked the elder brother who steadied the ladder, his hand a practiced anchor at my ankle. It prevents the argument from becoming visible, he said. If the public must accept a correction, give it something beautiful to accept. In lo rascal, endure. I thought about that when I stared too long at the fresco of the saint with the book without letters. Once, that book had been a law stones falling in parabolas, not angels carrying lamps across the sky. Now the book was gesture, and gesture, properly curated, is weapon. You don't need to burn a page if you can convince a wall to paint it blank. The third tool, the quietest, was instrument. In a drawer labeled Instrumentum, behind a ledger that reported sandals issued and wicks replaced, a basalt mirror lay like a patient black lake with a toothy rim. The brothers called it an astral lens. They handled it with cloth rings, like heat without flame. Too dangerous to use, the prefect said when I let my curiosity show. It magnifies the wrong things. He glanced at me the way a physician checks a pulse without offense. Which is doubt, he added, saving me the sin of asking. We placed the lens behind the grill with a ceremony that made safety sound like worship. Someone kissed the frame. I refused to kiss in public what I would not test in private. Later, I leaned over the glass when no one owned my attention. The mirror showed my face if I forgot it. If I remembered my face, it offered distance a corridor behind me that wasn't there, a lamp that was not lit, a hand that turned the page without moving my wrist. I left with the intuition that the lens did not magnify doubt. It magnified sequence, the order by which a memory lures the next memory to obey. That intuition became a crime the moment I believed it. Truth, when it begins to misbehave, rarely does so with trumpets. It bends. It makes you complicit by offering you the luxury of explanations that smell like candle smoke and book glue, gentle, civilized, easy to blame on humidity. The day I felt the bend without any of those perfumes, I was not below. I was in a parish attic, roofline low enough to intimacy, helping sort a box sent from the coast with an invoice that claimed it contained stone fragments for devotional instruction. The crate contained 3 things: shells, a compass, and a letter. The shells were plain. The compass was smart, its needle quivered with a secrecy some metals learn. The letter was compromised. It had been delayed, folded twice too many times, damp-edged, then pressed under something heavy that smelled like catechism. It read, "We moved the anniversary so the procession could pass under sun." The mother came on the old day. The square sold bread like a market, and the church, being merciful, was closed. She said the bread tasted like betrayal. The priest's hand had been careful, the commas differentially penitent. He did not ask for correction. He reported a cost. I put the letter down beside the shells and the untrustworthy compass. The needle leaned away from north, toward the sea it could not see. "It's corroded," the sacristan would have said. "Humidity." I said nothing. Some disobediences you commit by refusing to speak on behalf of the excuse. I took the letter back to the map corridor and set it beside the twin atlases as if weighing it on a scale made of paper. If the harbor's teeth had been smoothed to ease pilgrimage, perhaps the grief had been smoothed to ease a calendar. The bend in memory is not only an act applied to publics, it is an act applied to mothers. You can move a feast for order. You cannot move hunger without inventing another sin to cover it. That afternoon, the prefect summoned me with the tone of a man who believes he has invited you to dinner when he has, in fact, made your chair part of the table. His office gives good geometry, right angles that pretend to be ethics. He closed the door with a small sound, like a memory deciding not to elaborate. On the desk, a folio with a blue ribbon, which is the color the building uses when it wants to perform permission. "Your diligence has become attentive," he said, as if he were diagnosing a fever. "It is time you understand succession. Endary time." He opened the folio to a page of portraits, medallions, like coins you are not allowed to spend. Between two faces I recognized lay an empty circle with a penciled oval inside, a placeholder for a face that had never been allowed to harden into a die. In the margin, neat instructions: if questioned, attribute irregularities to interregnum. Emphasize supply chains. Bread, oil, the continuity of blessing. He slid a second page across, staging notes for a funeral that would not be public because it would have to occur twice. You will assist, he said, with the transfer of which body? I asked, which is equivalent to asking whose truth will be happier as rumor. He didn't answer. He created context. A family with a claim, a city in a mood, a calendar hungry for predictability. A clean line. He quoted something someone had once written, then crossed out, is more pious than a true one. He did not look ashamed. He looked professional. What do we do with the first funeral? I asked. We shelve it, he said, and I understood the size of the shelf he meant. That night, the reverse hymn grew meticulous. We stood in the grill chapel with our backs to the altar. The brothers' hum located the hour like a bat locating a moth. The lamps lowered. Testimony without complaint. The casket we moved was moderate in weight, but insistent in the way names weigh. We carried it through corridors that had learned our footprint and made it easier for us not to leave one. At the turn where the wall sweats, a shiver of pollen again, dry and sweet as a mercy left in a drawer. I realized the smell had become a standard for truth in a place that renamed truth humidity. We reached a room I had seen only from the outside, a sacristy that had the problem of being too practical to be holy and too holy to be recorded as practical. The casket rested on a low trestle. Two brothers unrolled a cloth with measured softness. On it lay rings, seals of men and of offices, arranged not by chronology, but by compatibility. Alternative histories, the elder brother said, a phrase said sweetly to make the poison dissolve in the mouth. He pressed one ring into wax on a blank page and produced a document that proved a decision had occurred in a room that would later be renovated into non-existence. There, he said, pleased by the crispness of the impression. Now we can show continuity to those who require such comforts. We replaced the ring in its slot. Another ring left no impression when tested, as if it had lost its nerve. Choose a different hand, the younger brother said, and pressed my thumb into ink and then into the margin. You are only making a witness, he said pleasantly, as a dentist explains pressure, not a signature. And what am I witnessing? I asked. The absence of an interruption, he said. He was right, and the correctness made me hate him less. We closed the casket. We hummed the hymn backward until the air agreed not to remember our route. We returned through the door that is a lung, and left it to breathe us back into the part of the building where obedience wears lamplight like a reasonable coat. After the transfer, the astral clock faltered and held its falter. For a full minute, it refused to choose forward or back. The sacristan flapped his hands at humidity like a man shooing a smell from a kitchen, but the zodiac teeth did not resume their neat bite until I stood under the dial and said, not aloud, I am a hinge. The minute reattached itself to the hour with a click that felt like the opposite of prayer. Sometimes a system does you the favor of showing you its naked mechanism. A week after the transfer, we received an instrument labeled Instrumentum Number 7. The brother who brought it handled the crate like a secret that sate him. For the teaching museum, he said, because when you do violence to memory, The correct euphemism is always education. Inside, a bundle of rods with carved scales, a compass that could be dismantled into argument, a tube that pretended to be a telescope and succeeded when nobody asked it about lenses, and a set of plates engraved with comets that looked like angels if you turned them upside down. "This room will teach wonder," the prefect said, as we arranged the objects behind glass. He did not say method. Wonder is easier to curate. Method comes with expectations. A label card lay ready in his hand. Observational device used by saintly astronomer to behold the firmament. I did not argue with the grammar. The sentence did the work. It made instrument into relic, and relic into instruction, for reverence rather than for repeatable action. I wrote a private label in my notebook, tool that could have been a laboratory if not taught to be kissed. The museum opened not to the public, but to novices boys, whose collars would be paper-colored soon enough, girls whose eyes measured rooms in terms of what they could carry away without their hands moving. The brothers guided them like considerate captors. "See how the angel's tail points the way," one said, finger hovering over the comet turned right side robed. "See how the saint lifted the tube to the heavens?" Another asked, as if the tube could not be lifted to earthly horizons without compromising a narrative. The children swallowed wonder. They were spared method like a poison and thanked us for the mercy. I left early, ashamed of how clean my hands were. That night, the silver plate at eye height refused to be Memoria Ordo Est. It declared Memoria Orbis Est with the stubbornness of a weather vane in a wind that has decided to be instructional. I read it twice. The second reading accused. If memory is the world, what have we done to the world when we file memory under clerical categories? Shelved the coast, tabbed the saint, ringed the succession, glazed the instrument. I went to the portamanus with no plan I would accept as mine. The handle warmed with the relief of a thing that has at last been touched by the hand that has long rehearsed the touch. The room beyond offered its usual courtesy, the lamp lowering, the dust choosing elegant orbits, the table presenting the custodia hominum, the way a court presents the law to a defendant who has arrived out of breath but on time. I opened to the page where the diagram lived, archive school liturgy rumor art, and waited for my disgust to grow efficient. Disgust failed. Precision took its place. I traced the arrows with my eye and watched an unlabeled line appear not in ink, but in my comprehension. A line I had refused last time because it would simplify my blame. Science was never absent from the diagram. It was everywhere, disguised as danger in the archive, as decor in the school, as miracle in liturgy, as omen in rumor, as angel in art. The book had not added the line. I had. They had trained me to read sequence. I finally applied it to instruments. When a tool arrives that could teach the sky to be predictable, you strip it of repeatability and teach it to perform singularity. Once there was a saint. Once there was a lens. Once there was a night when the comet had a tail like a hymn. You seed the story where replication would live. You curate gratitude where experiment would breed expectation. Then, over generations, you exhibit wonder to the young and call the absence of method humility. I should have closed the book. I turned the page. In the lower margin, a sketch no more than 6 strokes of a pen showed a ladder against a wall beneath an oculus. Beneath it, a note. Reverse hymn applied to tools, not relics, to mitigate noise. I laughed. which is a terrible reaction to an elegant cruelty. We had sung backward not only to cloak caskets and bones, but to carry ladders and wheels and boxes whose clatter had troubled witnesses. We had edited acoustics themselves. If you think that trivial, then you have not lived in a city where a crowd can turn on a noise and call it proof. I shut the book and leaned both hands on the slab, as if it were a dock and the room a sea in which I still thought I could choose not to drown. The younger brother stood beyond the grill. He had not entered. He had arrived. "You see the line now," he said without question. "I see the mechanism that makes wonder cheap," I said, "and mercy expensive." The words surprised me. They sounded like an angle snapping into square. "Do not mistake expensive for evil," he said gently. "Sometimes the price is all that saves a body from being spent." "I will allow it," I said, "when the body is a city. I refuse it when the body is a mother buying bread on the wrong day." He closed his eyes the way one does when light fails to solve a darkness. "Write that down," he said. "You will need to quote yourself when the building corrects you." "The building corrects?" "Of course," he said, and touched the grill as if it had a pulse. "We are not the only editors here." His certainties. When I climbed back to my room, the astral clock surrendered 3 minutes again, this time not as calibration but as gesture. The sacristan knew better than to speak. The minute came back when I held up the compass from the coastal crate and let its needle contradict the sky with conviction. The click in the mechanism sounded like relief. For a breath, I felt a kinship with a machine that was tired of pretending its obedience was nature. I would like to pretend that on that night I chose purity. I did not. I chose craft. I began to copy mechanisms not on paper, which the building owns, but in muscle and breath. I practiced the reverse hymn forward under my breath until my throat remembered how not to lower the lamp. I trained my ears to hear the half strike in rooms that did not own bells. I touched the basalt lens until it offered me a corridor behind me that never existed long enough to incriminate. I taught my body the grammar of the machine so that when I broke it, the break would look like fluency. The prefect noticed what good teachers always notice when a student's precision becomes a form of prayer. "You are ready to handle irregularities," he said, which is the administrative way of saying climax. He handed me a list with 3 lines. "Transfer the instrument to a teaching context. Stabilize a succession narrative in the North Wing. Review coastal maps for publication. Align to pilgrimage routes." "Why me?" I asked. "Because even when you do not need an answer, you deserve to hear how calmly someone will give it." "Because you remember in the correct direction," he said, quoting the sentence I had refused to let be a compliment. "Outward. And if outward finds mothers," I said, not smiling, "then you will learn to accept the exception," he said. "We use the word pastoral when we want to behave well in secret. Pastoral." I took the list and went to the map corridor first, because paper feels less lethal than bodies. I set 2 maps side by side again, then a third, this one ready for a printer's stone. The harbor had been groomed. The capital had edged east obediently. The pilgrimage route ran like mercy. I added in ink the sandbar the fishermen would curse about, not where it impeded the procession, but where it would ground a tax collector's boat the following spring if the calendar moved the market one day. It was a petty rebellion. I wrote it knowing a junior would fix it with a ruler in the morning and call it calibration. But for a night, the map told the truth loudly enough to annoy. In the North Wing, The succession fresco waited with the humility of plaster. A medallion had been scraped in preparation for the new face. I refused to give it a face. I painted, instead, a hand holding a book whose letters appeared only when the light took a certain angle, the kind of paint that would ensure anyone who squinted for a name saw, instead, a page trying to remember. The brother assigned to supervise me did not protest. He watched, with his patience the way a lock watches a locksmith. "You're leaving work for the night," he said. "Work that looks like devotion." I shrugged and forgave myself with the pocket-sized absolution of craft. In the teaching room, I relabeled a plate. I moved Angel Comet to Comet Angel, and was caught within an hour by a novice who wanted to pass my test. He corrected my correction and beamed at his courage. I applauded him and hated the system more efficiently than grieving would have allowed. The day ended as if it wanted me to admit sequence is immoral. Bell, half-strike, clock, stutter, plate, memoria orbis est. I went below on the half-beat, like a dance partner learning to trust the wrong lead. At the slab, the custodia hominum awaited. I did not open it. I rested my hand on its spine and said, because I needed to hear the sentence shaped by a mouth I trusted no longer. "We will stop moving grief for light." The younger brother, unseen in the chapel's hush, said, "You cannot promise that." "I can count it," I said. "And counting is a kind of vow." "Then count me," he said unexpectedly, stepping into the lamp's narrow circle. He pressed his thumb to the margin where my scar remembered duty. "Count me as the one who gave you the sequence and asked you to break it when it harms what it says it heals." We stood with our backs to the altar, which by then felt less like a sacrilege than like the correct position for hedging against a door. He hummed the reverse hymn forward, just once, and in the vault overhead the note did not lower the lamp. The air kept its brightness like a truth refusing a euphemism. "You taught me to carry," I said. "Now teach me to drop without shattering what matters." "We do not drop," he said. "We set the table wrongly and let the room correct itself." He smiled, and the smile moved a decade of tiredness out of his eyes. "The room has more mercy than we do." On the stair, the building offered one more instruction. The pollen smell met me without accompanying draft. It had learned to arrive even when the door did not breathe. A sign that Dream the Fifth, unlabeled line in the diagram, had chosen to conspire. Dream carries corridors where no map exists. Dream strikes a bell half because the full would be noticed. Dream is the infrastructure of a building practicing to remember itself without our edits. In my room, I wrote beneath, "I am a hinge." A hinge can teach a door to groan in the correct syllable. Petty? Perhaps. Useful? Often. I prepared for the 3 tasks the prefect had given me, as if they were a single task with 3 costumes: tool to relic, gap to line, coast to procession. I sharpened my pencils, because ceremony comforts hands when minds refuse. If you are waiting for the moment of pure refusal, knife, fire. A ledger flung into the sea. Grant me one more chapter. Machines prefer climax. They engineer it when patience would absolve them. I had to let the machine set its scene. The transfer would grow sloppy. The line would insist on being a circle. The instrument would reflect the wrong face. Someone would say humidity with the confident idiocy of a man who mistakes fog for theology. And then the building would correct. On the last night of this chapter, the astral clock did not strike. It waited. The bell did not half strike. It saved its note. The silver plate did not declare. It stayed blank, as if letters had become embarrassed to be seen speaking Latin to a man who now tested them for sincerity. I understood the courtesy. The building had decided to let me make a noise. Not music, not vandalism, a noise loud enough to be remembered by a mother with bread and a boy with a notebook and a brother whose scar had learned to understand that duty is a leash only if you keep feeding it obedience. Tomorrow, we would attempt to stabilize a succession, translate a coast, and exhibit a relic. Tomorrow, the instrument would show the room something it had never been permitted to see. But tonight, I placed the compass from the coastal crate on my desk and watched the needle lean toward the sea it would never touch. True north is a courtesy lacquers into a habit. Longing is the more reliable direction. If the chapter must end with a sentence that earns its shadow, let it be this: continuity is a kindness until it becomes a cage. And cages, no matter how piously painted, remember the hands that learn to open them from the inside. The day the machine asked me to prove I belonged to it, the building went quiet in the wrong places. Noon arrived without the clatter of trays in the refectory. The fork and cup liturgy had been postponed, as if hunger could be calendared. The astral clock, faithful in its indifference, refused theater. No pause, no gift of minutes lost and found. It simply watched. I felt watched, in return, not by men, but by sequence waiting to see whether I would obey its choreography or teach it to limp. The prefect handed me the list I had already memorized. Transfer an instrument to a teaching context. Stabilize a succession in the north wing. Align coastal maps with a pilgrimage route. 3 errands that would, taken together, resemble a sacrament. Tool into relic. Gap into line. Coast into procession. He did not bless me, he aligned me. We began with the instrument. In the teaching room, the glass had been polished into sincerity. The basalt mirror, the astral lens, lay in its frame, beside the engraved plates of comets that make angels when turned upright. Novices stood in a flock that had learned meekness, collars still paper white, eyes ready to worship. The label card waited to teach them how to say wonder, as if it were an absolution. I asked for the room to be cleared as a precaution against fingerprints, which is how you buy privacy without sounding like a thief. The younger brother stayed. He watched me the way a lock watches its key, neither hostile nor hopeful. "We'll make it brief," I said. "Brief is how you commit the crimes that stick," he replied, and did not move. I lifted the basalt carefully. It did what it always does when you disturb it properly. It offered distance that wasn't there, showed the corridor behind me that did not exist, brightened the lamp that did not burn. I held it level enough to punish my hands. "We've taught it to be relic," I said. "Today we'll teach it to be method once. Once is worse than never," he said. "Once makes rumor honest." "I'm counting on rumor," I said. He closed his eyes and nodded. "Not yes, permission is not something honest. Men grant so easily but acknowledgement. What will you ask it to show?" "Not the sky," I said. "A habit." The Saturday, I tilted the lens until the room's reflections surrendered, and then breathed on the surface, a fog brief enough to pass as accident. In that blur, the mirror settled on a track, a seam in the air like the groove a stylus follows. The reverse hymn leaves a channel if the same corridor hears it often enough. The brothers teach their throats to erase witness. Their throats teach the room to remember a frequency. I positioned the lens to catch that frequency, then hummed forward, not backward, the 3 notes I had trained into muscle, the ones that refused to lower the lamp. The surface shivered, and an angle appeared, the ladder's path, the casket's turn, the places where the glass inside boxes agrees with steps. It did not reveal faces. It revealed sequence and outline of logistics and light. If a novice saw this, he would know that the room owns a choreography. If enough novices saw, the choreography would have to answer to minds that had not pledged themselves to edits. I set the lens down and flipped the label. Comet, angel, became instrument, method, in my own hand, brief, disobedient, true. Then I wrote 2 words, no catalog can digest. Repeatable, use. The younger brother's jaw worked as if the muscle had learned a separate liturgy. You've done more than show method, he said. You've shown maintenance. Maintenance is mercy, I said. People who understand care stop calling miracles by names that make them lazy. He put the original label back, palms gentle, like a mortician's. We'll leave yours beneath. Paper has a way of slipping in the right weather. Humidity, I said, and we both laughed the laugh of men who have lost the right to innocence. The second task succession waited with the patience of plaster. The north wing smelled of lime and apology. A medallion had been scraped and was ready to accept a face it did not deserve. The scaffolding trembled with the excitement of young hands who think craft is loyalty. I climbed. The elder brother held the ladder, grip steady, attention wider than caution. Which face? I asked. The face that prevents argument, he said. None do, I said, and painted a hand instead, a hand holding a book whose letters would reveal themselves only to light at a certain angle and refuse the eye otherwise. Some will call that trick. It is instruction. Turn the head, change the light, see how a page hides didactics until a student moves. Names? He asked. Deferred, I said. He tightened the ladder against the wall. You will be asked to account for that choice. One has save. I have a receipt, I said, and meant the mother with the bread that tasted like betrayal, and the priest's commas, and the compass needle refusing north. I meant the letter that didn't ask for corrections, only reported cost. We left the medallion with its hand and its book, and a face implied but not granted. We left the ladder in place, an honest sin. The reverse hymn would move it tonight without noise, and no one would remember it had been left. I did not care. I wanted the scaffold to stand into evening as a question you could climb. The third task maps brought us back to the corridor I had taught myself to hate efficiently. The printers had been warned to prepare stones. The clean coast was ready to harden into ink. I laid the fisherman's sandbar back into the harbor part, petty revenge, part plea. Then I threaded the procession route around it, so that both bells and boats could be right in different weathers. The younger brother watched, amused at the compromise that bore the posture of virtue and the breath of cowardice. At least it admits 2 truths, he said. The room can correct what is at least admitted, I said. It cannot correct what is erased. We were almost done. The machine had almost won. It rarely needs a fight. It prefers completion. Then the half-strike came from below, softer than the ones before, like a bell embarrassed to be helpful. The younger brother and I looked at each other with the reflex of men who have agreed not to agree in the same direction for too long. Movement, he said, not people. We went down to the Porta Magnus on that half-beat, and the door behaved like an animal that had learned our steps. It breathed us in, breathed us out. In the chapel, the grill squared the air into obedience. The custodia hominum waited on the slab threads tighter than any seamstress would advise. The elder brother arrived with the ring case. The prefect arrived with a folio ribboned blue. Everyone wore a face I had learned to name by function: continuity. "We will complete the line," the prefect said, as if the sentence were a courtesy rather than a verdict. The folio opened to a document that would make a death occur twice and a mourning occur neatly. The ring selected for the seal was old enough to be plausible and recent enough to command compliance. He pressed it to the wax. Nothing happened. No impression, no crest. The wax remained unmarked, as if it had once been used to resist fire and had never learned to take instruction. The prefect pressed harder authority, relying on pressure because it has run out of persuasion. Still nothing. He changed rings. The second left a faint geometry that fled while we watched. The brothers looked at one another, not with fear, but with the professionalism of men filing a surprise where surprises are supposed to go. "The wax is cold," someone said. "The room is wrong," said another. "Humidity," offered the sacristan, and was ignored. The younger brother looked at me with the expression that locks give keys when they are ready to learn a new shape. "If the seal won't mark the page," he said, "perhaps the page is done being marked." I took the pen. I do not mean the ceremonial pen with its clean nib and compromised reservoir. I mean the pencil from my sleeve, the one that writes the world when the room refuses. I drew a line beneath the vacant seal, not a signature, a ruler, and wrote 5 words: "Do not move this grief." The prefect stared as if I had succumbed to a childish superstition. "We cannot leave a gap," he said. "We must complete the line." "The gap is true," I said. "The line is tidy." "We do not curate chaos," he said. "We curate cost," I said, "and we pretend we don't." A silence performed itself, then the kind that is less absence of sound than presence of judgment. The elder brother broke it with the gentlest violence I have ever seen. He took the ring, pressed it to his own thumb, and left the geometry in his skin. Then he pressed his thumb beside my line on the page. The mark held a witness, not an edict. 2 witnesses, he said. No seal. Let the room decide how to remember. It should have ended there, a compromise ugly enough to pass as wisdom. But the building had saved a noise for us. The astral clock did not stutter. It reversed 1 tooth backward. 2, and the bell above did not strike a whole or a half. It breathed a sound like a door discovering its hinge. In the corridor, the silver plate at eye height had been polished blank, and yet as we turned, letters appeared as if light itself had decided to carve: Memoria Ordo St. Memoria Orbis St. Memoria Oris Est. Memory is order. Memory is the world. Memory is the mouth. "Rumor," the younger brother whispered, reading the 3rd line correctly. "It has entered the diagram." He was right. The 5th arrow we had misnamed art was not the end. It was a mouth. Rumor spills into mouths. Mouths sing hymns. Hymns reverse or not. Mouths teach children. Children carry maps home in their pockets and place sand where the procession wishes there were floor. Mouth is where the edits go to negotiate with birth. The prefect, cornered by a mechanism that had decided to be sincere, fell back on craft. "Then we will mark the movement with the hymn," he said. We will do it properly and let the air forget. He turned his back to the altar and gave the note. The brothers followed, reflexes older than conscience. The lamp lowered obediently. I did not sing backward. I sang forward quietly at first, then with a stubbornness that turned the note into friction. Forward insists on footprints. Forward returns the scrape of a ladder to the ear. Forward hands the witness back to the witness. The younger brother heard my treason and matched it, a harmony that refused to crouch. Two throats cannot cancel a choir, but they can teach the room what a refusal sounds like. The lamp rose, the note wavered, the grill hummed the way metal hums when a train it didn't expect goes by. Stop, the prefect said, which is a sentence administrators deploy when they realize control has an acoustics. Count, I said, because commandments fail where arithmetic survives. Count the vials. He stared. The brothers stared. We all knew that sentence. We had all obeyed it. Do not count the vials. We had kept it as religion because numbers invite discovery, and discovery invites the wrong kind of conversation. I spoke again, louder in the polite way a man is loud when he intends to be quoted. Count the vials. The younger brother stepped to the crate where glass had been agreeing with wood for too many years. He opened it and lifted the first bundle. 1, he said. The word landed like a tool in a room that had been decorated as a chapel. Another brother, then another. 2, 3. The elder brother's voice, soft with the dangerous dignity of remorse. 4. The sound of counting struck the walls with a pedagogy no hymn ever provided. Numbers are disrespectful servants. They refuse to kneel to narratives. Enough, the prefect said. Enough began at 1, I said. He reached for the ring box, as if sovereignty could be restored with jewelry. The younger brother closed it before fingers arrived. He did not do it rudely. He did it with the respect one gives a body that deserves to be buried once. What do you think you're doing? The prefect asked, genuine confusion cracking his professionalism. Stalling, I said. So rumor can learn the truth before the label does. You mean to leak method, he said, glancing toward the teaching room where the basalt lay and the plates lay, and my label hid beneath the official one like a conscience waiting for weather. I mean to return witness, I said, to the mother, to the fisherman, to the boy who will carry a sandbar home and draw it wrong and be punished into being right. Into being obedient, he corrected. Yes, I said. Right, here, has been taught to mean obedient. The argument should have collapsed into punishments. Instead, it became administration forms later. Whispered warnings tomorrow. Assignments rearranged so that our hands would become too tired to lift the will to be inconvenient. That is how machines defend themselves when violence would draw the wrong attention. I expected that. I had prepared not for their teeth, but for their patience. We closed the book without blessing it. We left the casket without moving it. We carried the ring case back to its drawer and did not re-index it. On the stair, the pollen smell met us without the door breathing. The building had learned to carry its own rumor. The silver plate retained the third line. Memoria Oris Est. I touched the letters and felt warmth, not from metal, but from mouths repeating. Upstairs, the teaching room had not been breached. No novices had blundered into method. The basalt reflected only what it wanted. The label I wrote, repeatable use, remained hidden beneath the official call to wonder. I did not lift the card. I did not overturn the case. I added a second card and slid it deeper. If the lamp lowers when you sing, try singing forward. The sentence was stupid enough to survive. It would be found by a child more likely than by a curator. In the map corridor, the stones were inked. The printer had not yet pulled his proof. I made one change that felt like vandalism and was, in fact, apology. I drew a small dot by the harbor, where the sandbar makes a lyre of the liturgy of bells. I labeled it with nothing. Dots are powerful. They pretend to be negligible until a fisherman recognizes his house and tells his son. I did not report to the prefect. I went to my room and opened the notebook where I am a hinge has learned to acquire footnotes. I wrote, "Do not move this grief. Count what they forbid. Sing forward where backward corrects memory into obedience. Leave labels that refuse to become doctrine. Trust rumor more than liturgy when liturgy has been taught to lie politely." Then I turned the page and wrote what I have been afraid to write since the first sentence of this confession. I will be remembered less as a traitor than as a maintenance man. The building needs both kinds. Only one is useful after the stones cool. I slept. Or I did what men do when they lie still and let a building think at them. The dream did not loop. It braided. The corridor turned left and right at once, and the bell struck a note I had not heard. Not a half, not a whole, but a held. The silver plate bore all three inscriptions, and then none, as if language had exhausted itself trying to remain relevant in a room where bodies had decided to count and not be corrected for it. When I woke, daylight had the color of paper that waited too long under a damp hand. The prefect had not sent for me. The brothers had not tapped the door. I was unpunished. I was worse. Expected to continue. So here is the only honest end to a confession that has pretended to be an investigation. I cannot burn the book. Fire is a confession too neat for a world that insists on sequence. I cannot topple the clock. It is not the clock that lies, but the calendar that asks it for favors. I cannot canonize the deferred without inventing a church that will lie better later. I can count, I can leave a dot. I can paint a hand with a book whose letters require the sun to commit. I can ask a child to breathe on a mirror and watch method congeal from fog. I can tell you this, and then trust you to tell someone worse at obedience than you are. Do not mistake this for rage. Rage is a ladder men climb to avoid the road. I am handing you a road. It is narrow and patient, and made of sentences you can whisper without drawing punishment. It goes like this: don't stop asking questions. The most dangerous thing to them is memory returning. If you dreamed of a corridor that loops, walk it awake and count your steps even if a voice remembers to forbid you. If your town's bell hesitates by half, write down the hour and ask the sacristan to say humidity twice. Then ask him to show you the ring that sometimes seals and sometimes spares wax. If a map tells you your harbor is smooth, go to the water and look at how it laughs. Draw the teeth and hand the drawing to a child who will be punished for it, and watch how punishment turns into method when he is old enough to be the cartographer who refuses to be hired. If a saint's name is not there, ask for the drawer. Ask for the tab. Ask politely, always politely, why boiling water must be an angel's idea when it is the idea of any mother who has the blessing of a pot and the courage to wait for the world to behave. If an instrument has been taught to be kissed, ask where its twins are. There are always twins, and ask if you may hold the other one with both hands, and if they say no, Ask if you may at least breathe on the glass. If you are a brother and you are reading this, and you feel the old sting at the base of your thumb, remember that the oath bound memory to duty. It did not bind it to silence. You can hum forward at the right moment and call it fatigue. You can hold the ring to your own skin and leave the seal in your flesh where it will argue with you at inconvenient hours. You can count vials and say you are rehearsing to count them backward. You do not need a key to open the door. Doors that are lungs open to pressure, the pressure of rumor becoming witness, of witness becoming map, of map becoming habit, of habit becoming law. If you do nothing else after these words, do this. Remember out loud. Not into a crowd, into a room, into a child's ear, into the margin of a book that only a tedious man will read. Memory prefers rumor that behaves with kindness. If the world forgives me, let it be for a maintenance that learned patience. If it does not, let it be for a maintenance that learned to say no where yes had been curated to feel merciful. Take this as a torch, not for arson, but for inventory. Walk the stacks. Label what has been filed under kindness when it is, in fact, withholding. Leave your pencil marks where ring impressions fade. Count. Count gently. Count anyway. And if one night you find yourself at a stair that smells of old coins and wet limestone, and a door breathes at the bottom, and a silver plate at eye height decides it is tired of Latin and shows you only your face, do not look away. Put your hand to the handle and feel how warm metal is when a room has been waiting for you. Turn, not to enter only, to remember